Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hi, Aaron. Great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. So, I know we have not been as diligent about recording these episodes and getting them out, and most of that's my fault. And I want to kind of give a little explanation and use that as the intro to our conversation today. I am a really big sports fan. Basically, it's at least going back before high school, I have loved playing and watching sports. I still, in my late 30s, try to play sports as much as I can. Most times just slow pitch softball, uh, golf, skiing. I'll try and play Thanksgiving football games. I love coaching my kids, go outside and play with them. I really love playing sports. I have a buddy who's trying to get me into cricket. I have other friends who play soccer, and I'm like, they'll let me out. I'll try to pick up basketball. Like, I really love getting out, playing, being active. In fact, I don't like exercising or running, but if there's a sport involved, I will go pretty hard. But because I'm getting into my late 30s and I'm playing sports like I'm in my late 20s, I actually have a torn meniscus, and I'm gonna need surgery coming up soon. So between the pain and kind of dealing with my knee, that's has impacted my lifestyle a little bit, but I do feel like these uh, free podcasts that aren't associated with any specific clients have kind of suffered, and I want to apologize for that. But when I think about sports and kind of for today's conversation, one of the things I've been thinking about for the last few months is kind of the concept of like a favorite and underdog, and especially how that relates to probabilities. So March Madness wrapped up. We're in the NBA playoffs, baseball season starting. But I've been thinking about this basically since the Bengals made it to the Super Bowl. They were pretty big underdogs in their first, or in the two games leading up to that, including in the Super Bowl where they lost to the Rams. But just this idea that even though favorites are expected to win, and they do win most of the time, underdogs still win, and that the less likely event still does happen, and we start to get sample sizes large enough that happen with pretty consistent regularity. The best example, I remember telling Trishul about this a little bit ago. Several years ago, Warren Buffett sponsored something with Yahoo Fantasy Sports and said if anyone picked a perfect March Madness bracket, he would give them $1 billion. Because the odds of, and again, Warren Buffett's just playing the probabilities, the odds of someone picking a perfect bracket really are that low. And so I'm sure Yahoo paid him for this, and it's actually kind of, he made an insurance policy for them that they knew could get backed. And this idea, like, even if you knew each team was going to win, they had a 70% chance of winning. Okay, so the underdogs only have a 30% chance of winning. The odds of every favorite winning over 63 games get ridiculously small. It's like you're getting 10 decimal places on the percentage. So you are starting to get to, it's probably something like on the scale of 1 in 10 billion to one, yeah, that's probably the scale. It's like it's starting at a 10-digit number. Realistically, like, what happens is some of the early games, some teams have a 90% chance of winning, but a lot of the games are closer to 50-50 or 55-45. And so that's part of what makes the odds of that just extremely long. And so Warren Buffett was kind of able to ensure this. And this actually comes out is the same type of policy, just with much bigger numbers, that you'll see at a wide variety of events. If you ever happen to go to like a charity golf event, and there'll be, if you get a hole in one on this hole, you win a car, or you win $10,000, or if you go to a basketball game and during halftime, so I went to UCLA, did this every halftime, every home game. One of the students will get a chance at a layup, free throw, three-pointer, and half-court shot. And if they can do that in a certain time, they get tuition for the quarter or something like that. They will also sometimes do it at, like, if you just make the one half-court shot, that you'll get some kind of prize. And the reason the schools and all the teams can offer is that there's actually insurance companies that will insure those types of events. They actually have pretty good odds and pricing on what's the likelihood that this thing's going to happen. And so for that hole in one thing, you could, as a tournament or the organizer, pay something like $500 to insure that hole, that if someone gets a hole in one over the course of the field, could be 100 people playing through the course on that particular day, it'll pay off a roughly $30,000 car. And that, so there's kind of known insurance policies for these types of unlikely events. And that's kind of just what Warren Buffett did. He was the insurance company that was offering $1 billion if this type of event, this very unlikely event, happened. And so as I described this to Trishul, this concept of the unlikely events almost being measurable. So one of the kind of the conversation I want to talk about today is, what's the difference between how people think about it? Like there's no way this could happen. When it's like you force it to think, well, yes, technically it's possible, but I just can't believe that this thing is going to happen because it's unlikely. So kind of the way people think about it, especially in the moment, before it's happened, they can't believe how the unlikely event would happen. And the other part is just that concept of trying to measure the unlikely thing and then tying either insurance to it, or kind of measuring the risk and probability and how that kind of plays out in finance and insurance. And we've kind of related to conversations we've had in the past about things like life insurance versus car insurance. So I'll first start on the human side. When something extremely unlikely comes up, one, I guess, have you had that feeling of, oh, there's no way this is going to happen, I can't believe it?
Yeah, I feel like there's like a big numbers type of behavioral effect going on here. It's like the notion of, we can maybe imagine what it means to, live for 5 years or 10 years or 100 years, but then our brain isn't really meant to handle very large numbers. Like, what does 1,000,000 years mean? Or, what does 1,000,000,000 years mean? It just, things get so hard to understand when numbers get so out of ordinary from what we're used to. And the way I kind of put this into perspective, for example, with the Warren Buffett $1 billion challenge, is I just thought of it in my mind like, what's the chances of getting 63 coin flips in a row and, predicting that? I feel like, for example, let's say there's just two teams competing, right?
Yep.
Then it's just 50-50, right? And if there's four teams, well, then to pick the winner, it's like 1 in 4, right? Assuming they're even odds. And if it's 63 different chances of playing, well, then you got to basically predict 63 times in a row. You have to get all 63 right to be the ultimate winner. And if it's like a coin flip, like each team is even odds, then that's kind of like a worst case scenario. And like you said, it's probably easier than that worst case scenario because some early matches it's very skewed.
Yeah.
But just to give a rough idea without doing too much complicated analysis, it seems like if each chance was 50-50, it's like I said, getting 63 coin flips in a row. And I just plug that into Excel, and it's one of those where Excel doesn't bother giving the whole number. It just gives like a few decimal digits and then an exponent of right. So it's like basically 1 times 10 to the negative 19. What does that even mean? I don't know if we have a number to represent that.
Usually when I see numbers that, I'll do the inverse because that helps, I think, people conceptualize it. So it's like, I think I did the same math, and so at 50-50, it's like there is a 1 in 9 times 10 to the 18th. And so it's like, just how many zeros is 18 zeros? And so it's like you go, okay, million is 6, billion is 9, trillion is 12, quadrillion is 16. So we're up in the like it's 900. There's a 1 in 900 quintillion chance getting 63 games correct if they were 50-50.
Right.
Like that's the scale that we're at.
Yeah.
I can't think of any. Like, I don't. Do you think there are a quintillion grains of sand on the planet Earth?
Let's see. So what I've heard is there's more grains of sand there's no more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on planet Earth.
Oh, that's actually okay. I just did a quick Google search. How many grains of sand on Earth? Vegas, 7 quintillion. 500.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, I'm pretty impressed with my guess there. Like, I'm getting like goosebumps. That was crazy.
So basically, it's a chance of picking a grain of sand out of all the grains of sands on the planet.
Yes.
So from that perspective, yeah, I'd say taking the other side of that bet, basically, yeah, if you can pick out the grain of sand I'm thinking about out of all the grains of sands in the planet, I'll give you $1 billion. That's like the equivalent to the Warren Buffett challenge.
Yeah. But you have to have the slight caveat, okay? Because again, we're going to try and be correct with the probability. That's the odds of one person making one pick. With the Yahoo Fantasy Sports, there's going to be several 100,000, if not several million participants. So you're getting into these conditional probabilities. So that it brings it down maybe only on the scale of a trillion-ish. Trillion to quadrillion chance of happening, which is still a good bet for your billion.
Right. I'm searching. I think I have the terms here, but let's see. There, it's $1 billion and 40 installments of 25 million or 500 million upfront. Sure. It looks like any household can apply. So it sounds like it's a free thing.
Yeah. Yahoo was using this kind of like business marketing kind of thing to attract people to their game. They were paying Warren Buffett some equivalent, like $1 million or $10 million, as the premium of that insurance policy, just like that hole in one or the half court shot I described.
Okay, so here we go. The first 10 million, so just 10 million can apply for this challenge.
Okay.
So that they capped it at that. So basically, take the number that we had, 1 in 9 quadrillion, and divide that by a million.
Yeah.
So that basically brings us to 1 in. Well, okay, so this number gets chopped quite a bit. So now we're at 1 in. Let's see.
I think we're down to go from quintillions down to trillions.
Yeah, so 1 in 9 trillion at that point.
Yeah. which is
Okay,
still
so
not 9,000 billions.
well, okay, so now let's divide that by 1,000,000,000 and see what
Oh
we
yeah,
end
yeah.
up
There you
with.
go. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here we go.
So yeah, you're gonna get like a 1 in 9,000 chance of happening.
Okay, so I want to make sure I don't lose 100. Let's see, 1,000 million. Okay, one more zero, billion. 1 in 9,000. That's right, a 1 in 9,000 chance, assuming even odds of somebody winning this.
So that's what I think. So it's possible Yahoo only possible they paid him so you do the math of 111,000. So a billion divided by a 1 in 900,000 chance. So the odds of that Yahoo would have to pay him at least $111,000. It would not surprise me if they paid him $500,000 for that. What kind of that fits in their marketing budget to get 10 million people to play their game. Yeah, that's a 4x profit for him.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically, the numbers work out so that the expected value of insuring this is not that large of an amount.
Yeah. So the expected value of 10 million people winning again, it's that we're basing on that 1 in 900 quintillion number as the odds of getting a perfect bracket. It is not quite that high, because again, we have those early games that you can predict. The favorites have a 90% chance of winning. So it's not quite that high, but it's going to be on that scale. And so would not surprise me if Yahoo paid Warren Buffett a $1 million for him, like an expected value of 500,000. So he might have only
Right.
doubled his odds, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
So
Look at that.
so again, that's let's kind of go back. You can't that idea you can't conceptualize numbers that big. And so when you're looking, um, a good example. So I was playing golf with some friends, and we were playing a par three. Hit a horrible shot off to the right. One of the other guys was on the green. I'm looking for my ball. I'm up on this hill. I'm 50 yards from the green. I'm just trying to get onto the green. My buddy he's a little past the hole, so his back is to me. He starts to play his putt, doesn't see me because his back's to me. So I'm just trying to get on. I'm not expecting to be anywhere close. I get a okay chip. It's on the green. It's rolling. He doesn't see me. I don't know if he actually doesn't hear me. He makes his putt, and those two balls hit each other in motion. He's putting towards the hole. My ball goes between him and the hole, and my ball hits his ball. And it's one of those things there's no way we could replicate that. There's no way. Again, the odds of that happening are so extremely low. But these kind of super, super, super low probability things happen around the world all the time. But also in part, there's a difference between the thing happening and how crazy was that after the fact versus if you ask someone in advance, what are the odds that your two balls collide while moving? It's not going to happen. They would say it's virtually impossible, kind of thing. And so I want to kind of talk about that, the to a lesser degree, it would be things like Trump winning the election, where people didn't think it was going to happen, but that 30% probability thing did happen. And other times where the people are kind of so they're overconfident that something's not going to happen. They assign it like a 1% chance of happening, but it's actually like a 10% chance of happening. And I think that's the thing I think about most is like they truly discount how likely something is to happen, even if they're trying to make that type of prediction. And so they have this feeling of when the 10% thing happens, of like genuine shock and surprise. And so here, do you have an example like that where prior to the event you would not have believed something would have happened, and so when it did, you felt that feeling of shock, like, wow, I would never have even after the fact, I would not have believed that could have happened. But rationally, because you kind of understand how probabilities work, it's like, okay, like that was a 1 in 20 chance of happening, and it happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think the reason these kind of flow through the way they do like that is because it's similar to the example with Warren Buffett's his March Madness prize scenario, because the notion is you have a very low probability of event, 10 to the negative 19, and then you have a very large amount of money, tied to it. And basically you end up running through all of the math and you get a number that's in like a reasonable range in terms of expected value, 100,000, 500,000, right? So basically you had a very small probability event, but then you had a factor to multiply with a very large number, and you get a human sounding number at the end. That's why the bet makes sense, from Warren Buffett's standpoint. But if you don't run that analysis, it seems almost bizarre or weird. And I think the way I try to put that into just more human understanding is, if you think about it, there's low probability events happening every single second, right? Like all over the place, there's low probability events happening, but most of them are not noticeable.
Okay.
Meaning most of them we just don't care about. All of these events are still occurring, but nobody really, cares that the ball came 2 inches from each other, right? But these are all
Yeah.
little low probability events. But to counter that, there are literally a tremendous amount of events also happening every second.
Yeah.
So you multiply the two and you get something that, yeah, every once in a while you'll see a now low probability event that you care about happen. And it's almost a certainty given all the events out there. So I guess that's what I try
that's a
to.
really good point. It's like, uh, in my golf example where they hit each other in motion, it's like, because we weren't thinking about that event prior, like we would have felt the same shock if both balls went in the hole.
Mm-hmm.
We would have felt the same shock if I hit his putter instead of his ball.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like we're there's a difference between like trying to predict what the event is beforehand, and that's a truly low probability, versus the odds of something happening start to get kind of high.
Right. It's that notion of what do they say? You have 30 people in a room, and the chances of them having the same birthday is over 50%.
Oh yeah.
Well, right. That just you work through the math, and then that's what it turns into. Whereas you would think it's a very low probability event, but no, there's enough events out, within that sample to make that probability high.
Yeah.
It's also that notion of you travel to some random city on vacation and you see somebody, a classmate from 20 years ago.
Yeah. What are the
And
odds?
yeah, what are the odds? But if you run through the math, it's actually not so low.
Yeah, because you would have that feeling seeing any number of 200 to 500 acquaintances over your history in that one city. But you're like, yes, the odds of you meeting that one person in that one foreign city are very low, but the odds of you meeting someone that you've met in a foreign city start to get more and more likely.
Right. And you put in the non-randomness factors into it, the fact that people generally take their vacations around the same time and people generally travel to a certain number of major cities,
Yeah.
like and so on, and the numbers come back into the human realm.
So
So
try to
I think,
when's the
yeah,
last time you what do you have an example of like when you felt that shock?
I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it has. It's not really coming to mind right now,
Okay.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's like usually like things related to kids or sports, like those tend to, again, there's uh enough of those events that the things that happen are pretty unusual. If you ever watch baseball for an extended period of time, like there's almost a trope of like, oh, this player who's comes to bat is leading all third basemen in batting average when leading off an inning during day games.
Right.
And it's like
Yeah.
you've added enough qualifiers. It's like uh they're 4 for 8. They have like eight at bats. It's like, but they're leading in the batting average. So it's like it's those types of feelings of like, oh man, this guy must be a really good third baseman when leading an inning while playing day games. And
Right.
yeah, the trying to describe the events after the fact are it's uh there's definitely a human behavior element. It's like we're trying to fit description afterwards to what happened, uh, rather than trying to acknowledge this within the realm of possibility. So it's like, uh, again, I come to think about sports a lot. Like, what if you were to predict that scenario? Like, which third baseman will have the highest batting average when leading off an inning in day games? It's most likely just the third baseman who has the highest batting average. And it's like the better hitter just will lead most of those types of qualifying events. But you'll say this third baseman leads baseball in batting average, which is really good because there's lots of players. You won't add he's also the lead in the league in batting average when leading off during day games. He's also leading the league in average when leading off an inning during night games. He's also leading the league in average. He's probably leading in multiple categories, but you're not going to add those qualifiers because the conversation starts to sound weird.
Right. It's also one of those things where you have to kind of look at the sample, which is kind of what you're alluding to after you add in the qualifiers.
Yeah.
In the simple case where you have just one qualifier, well, then you have all the batters out there. But once you add a bunch in, well, then you may be down to a population that has only a handful of people, and to be chosen out of that handful, well, it's not as hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always, we look at, look at statistics on the first day of the season, and everything just feels weird. It's like, oh
Hmm.
man, he's already on pace after 2 games into the season to hit 200 home runs and shatter the record. It's like, well, let's see if he keeps that pace up of 1 home run per day, or 3 home runs in the first 2 days, something like that.
Right. It's so that's where in statistics the law of large numbers comes into play. The
Yeah.
notion that you need to have a lot of data points that are um, hopefully independent of each other. Not um, don't have some sort of correlation in them to tease out a signal.
And that's actually one of the things that comes up in things like the NFL and March Madness, where the playoff format is one and done. So um, you play one game and you advance. If you lose the game, you're out. Whereas the NBA and Major League Baseball, they have series. College World Series, also Women's College World Series will also do double elimination formats. And so if you have one of those early round March Madness games where the favorite's going to win 90% of the time, if they played 10 times, they probably win 9 of those games. But the underdog, if they only win one of those 10. If that happens to be the first one, that's the only one that matters. And so we don't get to see those other kind of replays or repeats of the same variable. And that's just one of the things that plays out in sports pretty consistently, is that uh, football tends to be a small sample size sport. There's only 16 games versus 162 for Major League Baseball. Sorry, now NFL now has 17 games. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why the underdog Bengals were able to win a couple playoff games, is they played well in those games. They might have had a 30-40% chance of winning each game. So if you were to predict beforehand the odds of the Bengals making the Super Bowl or the Bengals winning the AFC, they would have been relatively low odds. And this is what sports books make their money on. But it's a small sample size sport, and they played well in those games, and so they outplayed their opponent, and so they got to move on. But if they had to repeat, they'd be less likely that that's probably a good way to think about it. It's like if you just saw the Bengals, I think they beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. You saw the Bengals beat the Chiefs. If the same two teams play the same game the next week, the Chiefs would still be favored, even though everyone just saw the Bengals beat the Chiefs. All the kind of betting odds and people expectation would be the Chiefs are the better team. They will win the next game. And that's another kind of interesting part of that like human observation dynamic of, yes, they won the game. I still don't think they're the better team, which is
Yeah.
kind of true-ish.
No, that makes sense. Well, so I think when we see odds, sometimes our brain over extrapolates. And when we see anomalies, I think our brain over extrapolates as well. When in reality, the odds just may be what they are. For example, if a team has a 75% chance of winning, well, that's not a certainty, right? Many people may start filling out their brackets, for example, with a notion that that's far more likely than 75%, meaning 1 in 4 times that's going to go the other way.
So kind of come back to like the finance side a little bit. When you think of these low probability events that are kind of measured or uh, like there's enough of the like options or life insurance or car insurance. Like what are what are something that you think of those low probability events that do happen? Whether it could be like a black swan type event, could be the big market downturns. Like the odds that the market drops by 5% today are really, really low, but the odds that the market drops by 5% someday in the next decade are actually kind of high. Like what do you think of when you think of those low probability events that happen in finance and or like people's reaction to them?
Well, yeah, I think it's fair to understand that there's going to be many, many events. So those low probability events will eventually happen. I think that's something that we have to keep our mind on and not lose sight of. So, frankly, with the markets themselves, the ideal position or the ideal understanding is that over time markets go up. So even though these low probability events will happen and they'll be painful, over time you'll still come out ahead if you have a long enough time horizon. And at that point, the perspective you want to bring to the game is that you should be prepared to ride those out if and when they happen, because they eventually will happen. That keep that as a certainty. Like for example, investing in the public markets and equity, you should anticipate, even with an index, to perhaps be down over 50 to 60%. Because again, if history is to be our guide, that's what we've seen at a low probability, and there's no reason to believe why that can't happen again.
Um, so one, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. This might be getting a little selfish, but I have clients who work at companies and they receive stock options. We've talked about this before, and so they tend to have decent holdings in individual companies. And a big part of like how do we manage concentration risk? How do we manage the taxes? Like what's our upside? And because the range of outcomes for a single stock is greater than a diversified index. I'm trying to think of like how would you approach that, like I don't know if the feeling or like if just selling everything is not an option because it's not yet liquid, or we want to try and figure out hold some. Okay, so I guess that idea of like stocks generally go up over a long enough time period applies to a diversified portfolio. How applicable is that to a single stock?
Yeah,
How
I mean,
likely is it that a single company goes up over time?
right. The concern is that there's enough risk that that single stock could get into trouble, such that it not only lags the overall market, but the single stock can go away. It can go bankrupt, and that is a big concern, frankly. In terms of how likely, uh, I don't have specific numbers on that, but it's enough of a concern that it's not an ideal position to have that controlling your wealth, if losing that position would be hurtful.
Okay, that's good. That's a good way.
If
Yeah, if
yeah.
losing that position would be hurtful, that's a good way to phrase it.
Now,
That's
if it's
yeah.
right, if it's the satellite to your core, then okay, you can let it might be okay to let it ride. But if it's your core, then yeah, I'd say there's enough concern there to think alternative measures. Again, it's tricky, like you said, in this scenario, the liquidity is not quite an option. So it's one of those things where you'll need to keep that in mind until you have that liquidity event. It may be better to think that that's not quite your money yet, meaning don't start spending it as if it was.
Yeah, that's probably good for it. That's that's probably the yeah. It's and I think that comes out in conversation I have with clients of it's um would see how it's kind of almost like measure like how painful would seeing this go down actually be. Um, and if you can't handle that pain, if it actually is painful, like it's going to impact your lifestyle, then that's a reason why we would not be in it.
Right.
So,
And it's very easy to overlook the downsides, especially in the last couple years, right? The markets have just been rocking and rolling, and sometimes, again, just the human mind likes to extrapolate recent events indefinitely, right?
yeah.
And it's hard to really feel it until it's too late. So that you really need to keep that perspective, um, in light of what could potentially happen at the forefront of your of our collective thinking.
Okay. So, um, I know you don't have as much clients with stock options, but are there conversations you'll have with clients, or even just your own internal thoughts of uh, we're trying to protect against this downside when maybe we shouldn't be, or um, being people being too dismissive of a low probability event. It's like, oh, this is a possibility. We need to discuss it.
Yeah. So the way I like to think about it is, and we mentioned this during our conversations on insurance, you want to guard yourself against low probability events that can lead to a high probability of pain should those low probability of events occur. And, for example, in the stock market with a well diversified portfolio, you have these low probability of events. However, if you're prepared to ride them out, then they're not likely to lead to a high amount of pain. So, from my perspective, it doesn't necessarily make sense to guard against those, um, if you're comfortable with the pain, and that's where sensible risk tolerance metrics come into play, and position sizing, and adjusting allocations based upon risk profiles and whatnot, and that can all be managed pretty effectively. Now, on the other side, there are events that are low probability that can occur elsewhere that might have a high probability of pain that you do want to think about. And, the big one I like to think of in the insurance space is, for example, disability insurance. I've seen situations where individuals have great insurance on their car, like full comprehensive insurance, but not so much, or maybe nothing, if they become disabled and aren't able to earn an income. And, let's say you do get into that accident, you'll get a brand new car back, the one you bought last year. But if you can't go to your job and earn that income, that's not going to do so much for you. And, after the fact, you may be willing to say, hey, I don't necessarily need that brand new car back. I'd be okay with half the car. But if I have that disability insurance, I'm getting, a third to half of my paycheck. Well, then, yeah, that's probably going to be the bigger driver of your comfort level should one of these situations occur.
Yeah, I think it almost backs up our conversation about like the optics or the people trying to imagine kind of thing. Like they can imagine a car accident because they just see it on the freeway or they've probably been a small fender bender. Like they can imagine that, or it's been in the news. They actually have trouble imagining that they would become disabled.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But frankly, what that really means is the fact that you can imagine the car accident means that it's likely that that's not a low probability event.
Yeah.
In fact, the chances of getting into a car accident over a lifetime is close to 1.
Yeah. So so and that we talked about that car insurance companies price that in, and so that's why that comprehensive is more expensive because it's likely going to happen for most people. And it almost just kind of like prepaying the car through insurance, uh, like just in case it happens in that first year. But yeah, over time, that car insurance is not going to be a positive expected value.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, you're prepaying your car for when it does get totaled,
Yeah,
which it will. That's what you're doing, and you're paying a pretty hefty premium to prepay as well.
yeah. Okay. Well, any other low probability events that you think about sometimes?
Well, in the insurance space, it is those things where if you have a situation that is low probability and it could cause, and this has to be an individual thing, it can cause you personally a lot of pain, then that's what you want to insure against. And this comes down to life policies, and I'd say the term ones make more sense because again, the chances of any of us dying is 100%,
Yeah,
but it's going to be a low probability in terms of chances of dying in the next 10 years. And
yeah,
in those cases, it might cause a high amount of pain. So you got to check for each of these situations, does it fit those metrics? And sometimes it may not. Sometimes, for example, the extra warranty on your appliances, those appliances are going to break. You can plan for that. That's a high likelihood event. But your house burning down, or if you're in a flood zone, those are things to think about more personally. And I think that's what I'd say.
Uh, so if I hear this correctly, you because the appliances are likely to break at some point, the warranty is overpriced, and you're better off saving the money, get in anticipation of paying for a new appliance. But so for high probability events, don't, or you're better off self-insuring. But for low probability events, you want to use an insurance company.
Yeah, so that self-insurance notion can apply across the board with everything. And the way you think about it is the money you would have paid for that warranty, put it in a separate bucket, right? The money
Yeah,
you pay for that comprehensive, put it in a separate bucket. The money you pay for that low deductible policy versus the high deductible policy, put it in a separate bucket. Instead of paying those extra premiums directly to the insurance company, pay it to yourself, let it grow. For me, it just goes straight into the market, but you, depending on your risk tolerance, you can at least earn something on that. That premium can grow in your pocket rather than in the insurance company's pockets.
yeah,
And when an event happens, you're prepared for it because you realize that these events will happen. And the risk you kind of take on in that scenario is, yes, you could have a scenario where your brochure breaks the same time as you get in a car accident, the same time as you get a hole in your roof, right? That could happen.
yeah,
Over a lifetime, though, the notion is these events are guaranteed to happen over a lifetime. all of them. And, with enough buffer, self-insuring for these types of scenarios can likely make more sense than paying those premiums at every opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you for helping me transition from sports to insurance. I feel like that's a standard for our conversations.
Well, it sounds good, Aaron. Well, I enjoyed the conversation, and for any of our listeners, if you've come across a scenario where maybe you've had that low probability event occur out of the blue, and maybe it was truly extraordinary, we'd like to hear about it. Or maybe after thinking about it based upon some of the things we've said, it's brought a different perspective. That'd be interesting to know as well. So thanks, Aaron, for the conversation, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.